The Tarkin Doctrine emerged as one of the Galactic Empire's most defining strategies, representing Grand Moff Tarkin's uncompromising vision of how the galaxy should be governed. At its core, the doctrine was a belief in absolute control through fear rather than brute force alone. Tarkin saw fear as a tool more powerful than any weapon, a way to achieve stability by suppressing dissent before it could take root. To him, instilling terror was a cost-effective means of preventing rebellion across vast star systems. This philosophy justified the construction of the Death Star, a weapon capable of annihilating entire planets with a single blast. Tarkin viewed this superweapon not merely as a military asset, but as a symbol that would discourage resistance across the galaxy. However, this same doctrine, which Tarkin saw as the Empire's greatest strength, would ultimately contribute to its downfall, proving incapable of maintaining lasting control. The Clone Wars, which had ended only a short time before the rise of the Empire, offered a contrasting approach to galactic control. During the Clone Wars, the Galactic Republic's strategy was rooted in the use of clone troopers and the judicious deployment of the Republic Navy. The Republic's methods were tactical, targeted, and precise, focusing on winning battles that protected strategic assets and liberated planets under separatist control. The clones were bred to be loyal and disciplined, and they followed the Jedi generals, who emphasized both skill in combat and respect for the citizens they sought to protect. While the Clone Wars were violent and chaotic, the Republic's military approach was tempered by the values of the Jedi and their concern for the beings of the galaxy. The Republic's tactics aimed to win over hearts and minds, seeking to bring systems back into the fold through both military victories and diplomatic efforts. In contrast, the Tarkin Doctrine dismissed diplomacy and compassion as weaknesses. Tarkin believed that stability could only be achieved through absolute dominance, with no room for compromise or negotiation. To him, the Clone Wars had demonstrated the failure of the Republic's methods, as he saw the Republic's willingness to engage in diplomacy and respect local autonomy as signs of ineffectiveness. Tarkin was a firm believer that the galaxy was too diverse and unruly to be managed by any means other than fear. In his eyes, only a firm, unyielding grip would prevent the galaxy from descending into chaos once more. However, his doctrine ignored a fundamental aspect of galactic society, the desire for autonomy and the resistance that arises in response to oppression. One of the most striking contrasts between the Clone Wars' tactics and the Tarkin Doctrine was in their treatment of the local populations. During the Clone Wars, Republic forces, led by Jedi generals, often worked alongside local resistance movements or local governments to liberate systems from separatist control. This cooperative approach fostered trust and loyalty among the citizens of liberated worlds, creating a sense of unity and shared purpose. The Republic's presence was, for the most part, seen as a positive force aimed at restoring peace and justice. Clone troopers, though soldiers bred for battle, respected the inhabitants of the planets they protected, following the example of the Jedi. Under the Tarkin Doctrine, however, local populations were seen as potential threats rather than allies. Tarkin viewed the galaxy's diversity as a weakness rather than a strength, believing that cultural differences would lead to discord if not suppressed. His doctrine encouraged the Empire to impose uniformity and obedience, often through violent means. Worlds that resisted imperial rule were met with brutal crackdowns, their populations subjugated and controlled through terror. This heavy-handed approach alienated many beings, turning former Republic loyalists against the Empire. Where the Republic's approach created allies, the Empire's tactics bred resentment. Citizens who might have otherwise accepted imperial rule grew increasingly resistant, as they saw the Empire not as a force for order, but as an oppressive regime willing to destroy entire worlds to maintain control. The Death Star was the ultimate expression of the Tarkin Doctrine, a weapon that encapsulated Tarkin's belief in the power of fear. By demonstrating the ability to obliterate planets, Tarkin aimed to instill terror so profound that no world would dare rise against the Empire. The destruction of Alderaan was meant to be a statement to the galaxy, a warning of the consequences of defiance. However, this act of unimaginable destruction had an unintended effect. Rather than cowing the galaxy into submission, it galvanized resistance. The sight of an entire planet obliterated, along with billions of innocent lives, shocked the galaxy. It exposed the Empire's willingness to commit atrocities against its own citizens, fueling outrage and deepening the resolve of the Rebel Alliance. Tarkin's focus on fear as the primary tool of governance overlooked a fundamental aspect of human and alien nature, the strength found in shared suffering. The destruction of Alderaan turned the galaxy's anger into a rallying cry for the Rebel Alliance. Worlds that had once tolerated Imperial rule, hoping to avoid conflict, were now forced to confront the reality of the Empire's brutality. The Tarkin Doctrine failed to account for the power of hope and the resilience of those who sought freedom. While fear can be a powerful motivator, it cannot sustain an empire indefinitely. Fear breeds hatred, and hatred inevitably turns into resistance. The Empire's reliance on fear alienated its citizens, creating an undercurrent of resentment that would eventually boil over. During the Clone Wars, the Republic fought for the preservation of its ideals and sought to defend the galaxy from the tyranny of the Separatists. Although the Republic was flawed and often struggled with internal corruption, its core values of democracy, freedom, and justice provided a foundation that citizens could rally behind. The clone troopers and Jedi were symbols of these ideals, fighting to protect the galaxy from the chaos of the Separatist movement. In contrast, the Empire, under the Tarkin Doctrine, abandoned these principles entirely. It sought not to inspire loyalty but to enforce obedience. The Empire's disregard for the ideals that had once defined the Republic made it difficult for even its own citizens to truly believe in its cause. The Jedi had served as peacekeepers and symbols of justice, protecting the innocent and upholding the Republic's values. However, with the Empire's rise, the Jedi were hunted down, their presence erased from public life. In their place, the Empire established the doctrine of fear, and figures like Tarkin replaced the Jedi's moral authority with military might. Tarkin saw the Jedi as relics of a failed past, embodying the weaknesses of the Republic. But by eliminating the Jedi and abandoning the ideals they represented, the Empire lost a powerful means of unifying its citizens. The Tarkin Doctrine, with its singular focus on fear, lacked the inspirational qualities that had once brought the galaxy together under the Republic. It offered only oppression without any promise of a better future. This shift in philosophy, replacing ideals with fear, ultimately weakened the Empire's foundation. While fear might compel obedience in the short term, it cannot inspire true loyalty. The Republic's clone troopers, despite being bred for battle, had developed a sense of loyalty to the Jedi and to the citizens they protected. They fought not merely because they were ordered to, but because they believed in the cause they served. In contrast, the Empire's stormtroopers, trained under the Tarkin Doctrine, were tools of oppression rather than defenders of the people. They were often despised by the very citizens they were tasked with controlling, further isolating the Empire from the galaxy it sought to rule. Tarkin's approach failed to recognize the importance of these deeper bonds of loyalty and unity. He saw the Republic's approach during the Clone Wars as weak, overlooking the way it had fostered lasting loyalty and cooperation. The Republic's Jedi-led campaigns, despite their flaws, had won the hearts of many in the galaxy. The Empire, by contrast, inspired only fear and resentment, creating a widespread sense of disenfranchisement among its citizens. This failure to inspire loyalty proved fatal when the Rebel Alliance rose in earnest, drawing on the support of countless beings who had grown weary of Imperial rule. The Tarkin Doctrine's rigid dependence on fear fundamentally misunderstood the nature of lasting power. Tarkin believed that through overwhelming displays of terror, such as the destruction of Alderaan, the Empire could indeed secure the galaxy's obedience without needing to deploy extensive military resources across every star system. However, fear as a governing tactic is inherently unstable. While it might deter rebellion initially, it also fuels an underground desire for freedom that only grows stronger over time. Clone Wars had shown that a motivated populace could be the deciding factor in a prolonged conflict. The Republic's approach, though imperfect, had the advantage of securing genuine alliances based on shared values and mutual defense. In contrast, the Empire, through the Tarkin Doctrine, treated every citizen as a potential threat, which only served to create enemies where there had been none. The Republic's tactics during the Clone Wars were designed to foster support and legitimacy. Republic forces often engaged with local populations, working with them rather than against them. Jedi generals leading clone troops went to great lengths to win the hearts and minds of the systems they were liberating. By showing respect for local cultures and customs, the Republic won loyalty even in regions that had been under separatist control. The Republic's victories were not only military but ideological, as many planets willingly returned to the Republic, believing in the values it represented. While the Clone Wars were indeed brutal, the Republic's approach was one of restoration and defense rather than subjugation. This difference in approach created an enduring sense of loyalty and unity that the Empire could not replicate. Under Tarkin's leadership, however, the Empire abandoned the Republic's emphasis on cooperation. Tarkin believed that diversity in beliefs, cultures, and local governance would only weaken the Empire's grip, so he sought to eliminate these differences by imposing a uniform, fear-based rule. Local leaders were replaced by imperial governors, cultures were suppressed, and dissenters were brutally punished. While this approach allowed the Empire to quickly establish control, it also created a simmering resentment across the galaxy. Systems that might have otherwise accepted imperial rule grew to despise it, viewing the Empire not as a unifying force but as an occupying one. This resentment provided fertile ground for the Rebel Alliance, which grew in strength and numbers as more beings sought to resist the Empire's oppression. The Clone Wars had shown the Republic the importance of trust and morale, especially among its troops. Clone troopers, despite their origins as soldiers created for battle, had developed bonds with one another, their Jedi commanders, and the civilians they protected. This camaraderie fostered loyalty and resilience, creating a fighting force that was as ideologically motivated as it was skilled. The clones were not simply following orders, they were part of a cause, protecting the Republic and its ideals. This ideological commitment made them formidable on the battlefield and steadfast in their purpose. When the Empire replaced the clones with conscripted stormtroopers, this sense of purpose was lost. Stormtroopers were indoctrinated to follow orders without question, but they lacked the connection to the people they were supposed to protect. As a result, they were more feared than respected, seen as enforcers rather than defenders. The Tarkin Doctrine's emphasis on fear over loyalty made it difficult for the Empire to rely on its own personnel. Stormtroopers were trained to be ruthless, but their lack of moral conviction often led to disciplinary issues, and desertion rates rose as the Empire's reputation became increasingly toxic. The Republic had managed to inspire its forces, ensuring that even clones who had initially been bred to follow orders felt a sense of belonging and purpose. The Empire, on the other hand, turned its own soldiers into symbols of oppression, isolating them from the citizens they were meant to govern. This lack of mutual respect between the Empire's enforcers and the populace made it difficult to maintain control without constant displays of power, which only fueled further resentment. The Clone Wars had also revealed the importance of adaptable, flexible tactics, something the Empire abandoned in favor of brute force. During the war, Republic commanders, particularly the Jedi, were known for their ingenuity and ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances on the battlefield. This flexibility allowed them to respond to the dynamic nature of the separatist threat, which often involved unconventional tactics and a decentralized command structure. The Jedi encouraged their troops to think creatively, fostering a spirit of independence and adaptability that proved essential in overcoming the diverse challenges posed by the separatist forces. Under the Tarkin Doctrine, however, the Empire's approach to military strategy became rigid and monolithic. Tarkin believed that overwhelming force and psychological domination were all that was needed to maintain control. This inflexible approach left the Empire vulnerable to the decentralized tactics of the Rebel Alliance. While the Empire could easily crush large-scale uprisings with its superior firepower, it struggled to deal with the hit-and-run tactics employed by the rebels. The Rebel Alliance, much like the Separatists, operated through a network of loosely connected cells, making it difficult for the Empire to eliminate the movement entirely. The Empire's lack of adaptability, a consequence of Tarkin's doctrine, left it ill-prepared to respond effectively to the unconventional threat posed by the rebellion. The Tarkin Doctrine's failure to account for the psychological resilience of the galaxy's inhabitants further undermined the Empire's control. While Tarkin believed that fear would quash dissent, he underestimated the power of hope. The Rebel Alliance capitalized on the atrocities committed by the Empire, particularly the destruction of Alderaan, to rally support across the galaxy. Every act of oppression became a recruitment tool for the rebellion, as beings from countless worlds were inspired to fight back against the Empire's tyranny. The Clone Wars had taught the galaxy that it was possible to resist even overwhelming forces if one believed in the cause. Tarkin's approach ignored this lesson, focusing solely on intimidation rather than addressing the underlying discontent that fueled the rebellion. One of the critical aspects that the Tarkin Doctrine failed to replicate was the moral leadership provided by the Jedi during the Clone Wars. The Jedi were more than just generals, they were symbols of justice, wisdom, and selflessness. Their presence inspired those they led, providing a moral compass for the Republic's efforts. While the Jedi's methods were not without flaws, their commitment to the principles of the Republic made them powerful symbols for the people. The Empire, in contrast, had no equivalent. Its leadership was rooted in fear and self-interest, with figures like Tarkin embodying a philosophy that cared nothing for the individual lives under Imperial rule. The absence of a moral foundation left the Empire vulnerable to ideological challenges, as its citizens saw nothing worth defending in their oppressors. As a result, the Tarkin Doctrine's heavy-handed tactics created a sense of alienation throughout the galaxy. Beings who had once viewed the Empire as a source of order and stability began to see it as an oppressive regime that disregarded their rights and lives. This alienation reached a tipping point with the destruction of Alderaan, an act that exposed the Empire's disregard for life and galvanized the galaxy against it. The Empire's reliance on fear not only failed to suppress dissent but actively fueled it, as beings from all walks of life were driven to join the rebellion. The Clone Wars had shown the galaxy the power of united resistance, and the Tarkin Doctrine only reinforced the lesson, as every act of oppression deepened the resolve of those fighting for freedom. In its attempts to impose order through fear, the Tarkin Doctrine inadvertently created a climate of rebellion. By relying on intimidation and neglecting the need for ideological unity, the Empire alienated the very citizens it sought to control. The Clone Wars, with its focus on collaboration and respect for the galaxy's diverse cultures, had demonstrated that lasting loyalty could only be achieved through shared values and mutual respect. The Tarkin Doctrine ignored this lesson, replacing cooperation with coercion. In the end, it was this failure to inspire genuine allegiance that would prove to be the Empire's undoing. The Tarkin Doctrine's ultimate failure lay in its inability to grasp the fundamental principles of unity and resilience. Tarkin saw fear as a one-size-fits-all solution, believing that by demonstrating the Empire's overwhelming power, he could bring lasting order to the galaxy. Yet he underestimated the will of the galaxy's inhabitants to resist oppression. During the Clone Wars, the Republic had built its alliances on mutual respect and the promise of a brighter future. This approach, which valued diplomacy and cooperation alongside military strength, fostered a deep-rooted loyalty among its citizens. The Empire, by contrast, relied on sheer intimidation and subjugation, forgetting that lasting power requires consent as much as control. Tarkin's narrow vision blinded him to the natural human and alien desire for self-determination. The Clone Wars had taught the galaxy that even a vast, centralized power could be opposed, as long as there was a shared sense of purpose and a belief in something greater. The Separatists, despite their chaotic leadership and ethical missteps, had rallied a significant portion of the galaxy because they tapped into disillusionment with the Republic. After the rise of the Empire, the rebellion grew similarly, but with a stronger moral foundation. They were no longer fighting a corrupt bureaucracy, but a brutal regime that showed open disregard for life. The destruction of Alderaan marked a turning point, crystallizing for many beings that the Empire's rule was not just flawed but morally reprehensible. The Rebel Alliance, fueled by righteous anger, became a unified movement, bound not by fear but by hope and shared suffering. The Clone Wars also highlighted the importance of decentralized leadership and adaptability. The Republic's Jedi-led campaigns were often collaborative efforts that incorporated the expertise of local leaders and resistance groups. This approach allowed the Republic to engage more effectively with the unique challenges posed by each planet and culture. The Republic's ability to adapt to diverse environments and conditions made its military efforts more resilient, as they could adjust tactics to meet the specific threats they faced. Tarkin's doctrine, however, was based on a rigid, top-down approach that left little room for flexibility. The Empire's reliance on standardized, fear-based tactics limited its ability to respond to the varied strategies employed by the Rebel Alliance. The Rebel Alliance took advantage of the Empire's rigidity, using a decentralized network of cells to remain elusive. By avoiding large-scale battles and focusing on smaller, targeted strikes, the rebels were able to wear down the Empire over time. Each rebel cell operated independently, making it difficult for the Empire to dismantle the organization as a whole. Tarkin's doctrine, which prioritized visible displays of power, was ineffective against an enemy that operated in the shadows and thrived on unpredictability. The Empire's inability to adapt to the rebellion's tactics mirrored the Republic's struggle against the Separatists, who also used asymmetrical warfare to counteract the Republic's military advantage. The Empire's insistence on control over loyalty also created vulnerabilities within its own ranks. Unlike the Republic's clone troopers, who had been bred with a sense of duty and loyalty, the Empire's stormtroopers were often conscripts or recruits who lacked ideological commitment. The clones had fought for the Republic because they believed in its ideals and had a personal stake in the outcome of the war. The stormtroopers, on the other hand, were often motivated by fear of punishment rather than genuine loyalty. This lack of commitment led to low morale and, in some cases, outright defection. The rebellion capitalized on this, offering disillusioned Imperials an alternative path that promised freedom and purpose. The Tarkin Doctrine failed to inspire loyalty, creating an army of enforcers rather than defenders. The Republic's values during the Clone Wars, embodied by the Jedi and the clone troopers, provided a moral compass that gave its forces a sense of purpose. The Jedi, despite their flaws, served as symbols of justice and honor, inspiring those around them to fight for a cause greater than themselves. The Empire, however, rejected this approach, viewing ideals as weaknesses that interfered with efficient governance. Tarkin saw the Jedi as relics of a bygone era, failing to recognize the unifying power that their ideals represented. By purging the Jedi and replacing them with a doctrine of fear, the Empire lost the moral high ground. The Rebel Alliance, by positioning itself as a force for justice and freedom, attracted countless beings who were disillusioned with the Empire's oppressive rule. Tarkin's doctrine also ignored the importance of cultural identity, a lesson that had been evident throughout the Clone Wars. The Republic's Jedi-led forces often worked to respect and incorporate the unique traditions of the planets they liberated, seeing diversity as a strength. This respect for local customs helped the Republic build alliances and foster goodwill. In contrast, the Empire, under Tarkin's doctrine, sought to erase cultural differences, imposing a homogeneous, authoritarian rule that dismissed the significance of local identities. This disregard for cultural heritage alienated countless beings, who saw the Empire not only as an oppressive regime but as a threat to their very way of life. The Rebel Alliance, by embracing the galaxy's diversity, became a beacon for those who wished to preserve their heritage and identity. The Tarkin Doctrine's fixation on fear and uniformity proved especially counterproductive in the galaxy's Outer Rim territories. These regions, which had been largely neglected by the Republic, were accustomed to self-reliance and valued their autonomy. During the Clone Wars, the Republic had made efforts to protect and assist these territories, slowly building trust. The Empire, however, extended its reach into the Outer Rim with brutal force, imposing imperial rule on worlds that valued their independence. This approach turned entire star systems against the Empire, pushing them toward the Rebel Alliance. The Empire's inability to understand the Outer Rim's unique perspective made it difficult to govern these regions effectively, further eroding its control. Another crucial flaw in the Tarkin Doctrine was its failure to anticipate the endurance of hope. Tarkin believed that the galaxy could be cowed into submission, but he underestimated the power of resilience. The Clone Wars had shown that even against overwhelming odds, beings would continue to fight if they believed in their cause. The Rebel Alliance, galvanized by the destruction of Alderaan and countless other acts of imperial brutality, drew strength from the sheer magnitude of the injustice they faced. Tarkin's belief that fear could quash rebellion proved short-sighted. Instead of preventing resistance, it united and motivated the Rebel Alliance. Each act of repression only fueled the determination of those who fought for freedom. In the end, the Tarkin Doctrine's rigid philosophy of rule through fear could not sustain the Empire. Its emphasis on intimidation over inspiration, control over loyalty, and uniformity over diversity created an empire that was fundamentally unstable. Tarkin's approach overlooked the complex motivations and values of the galaxy's inhabitants, treating them as little more than subjects to be controlled. By dismissing the lessons of the Clone Wars and ignoring the importance of trust, loyalty, and adaptability, the Empire sowed the seeds of its own downfall. The Clone Wars had been a brutal conflict, but they had also demonstrated the power of unity and shared purpose. The Republic, despite its flaws, had fought for a vision of the galaxy that respected the rights and identities of its citizens. The Tarkin Doctrine, in contrast, sought to impose control through fear, disregarding the basic principles of freedom and dignity. In doing so, it alienated the Empire's citizens, created enemies within its ranks, and fueled the very resistance it sought to suppress. The galaxy, shaped by the brutal lessons of the Clone Wars, would not submit to oppression without a fight. The Rebel Alliance, drawing on the legacy of the Republic and the Jedi, became a force of hope and resilience, a testament to the failure of the Tarkin Doctrine. Tarkin's belief that fear could bring peace ultimately led to chaos, as the galaxy rejected the Empire's tyranny in favor of a new vision of freedom. The doctrine that he had championed, built on terror and oppression, could not stand against the enduring strength of hope, unity, and the desire for a better future.